We're back.
Yes, welcome back. Part two.
Part two. So we, in the first half hour, we commenced with sort of a looking back process for, what went on over the last 2 years of the city council term, and not just city council term, but, in and around Cambridge as well. So I think we got up to the point where the Sullivan Courthouse had been a big hot item back in, March, April of 2014. Eventually, the certain decisions were made in late summer, and then it went to court, and it's pretty much sitting there. If it ever gets out of court, ultimately there will be some issues about.
So when you say court, who's fighting? Is it a fight?
It was some abutters, some nearby neighbors raised issues of points of law. I think for the most part, they're really not going to go anywhere, but you never know.
Is there an overall idea for it? Is it for housing or what?
It's primarily just developing office.
So they're not going to tear it down.
And I think it's 24 units of housing. Now, I think some of the neighbors would have loved for them to tear it down, but the thing is that with $30 million of asbestos abatement, there's no way you can take all the value out of the building and then expect anything to happen. So if that would happen, the building will become a sarcophagus for the next 50 years.
I see. Okay.
So anyway, that's we'll see where that goes in the coming year or two.
Okay.
There will be ultimately some leverage from the city, I believe, with the First Street garage, which could serve as parking to service that building. But that's a city asset, so they will have some leverage. But again, it could. There's also an option of using some of the parking of the Galleria Mall to service the building as well. So the city may not have as much leverage as they may think. Another big thing, a very dominant theme for this council term, was commenced in, I believe it was early April of 2014, where there were competing master plan orders. A master plan I always thought it was a bit of nonsensical, but the thing is that it was political football in the election in 2013. So ultimately there were 3 councilors submitting one order about a master plan, and then another 3 councilors submitting a different order. I think the Car Loan, Simmons Mazin Car Loan version wanted to give a lot of the control to the ordinance committee, which would have been kind of unprecedented and quite frankly wrong. And the other one would actually have given a lot of control within the community development department to sort of officiate the process. Eventually they came to a kind of a settlement with, adjudicated by the mayor. And then, it turned into what do they call it? The Cambridge Conversations. It carried on through the summer into the fall and whatever.
The elections,
Yeah, and it sort of carries on to today. The city did hire a company called Utile.
Oh, okay, right. That's what to work on this whole.
So they are more of a comprehensive planning agency. So
is it called a master plan, or is it the citywide master plan?
I've just been calling it this. The city didn't seem to like the term master plan, so they started calling it citywide plan. But now they've kind of put the word out, asking people to vote or otherwise make some suggestions.
That's what I saw. I saw a sandwich board somewhere. So that's what that was.
Yeah, I expect it's going to end up being called Envision Cambridge, because that's sort of a trendy way to call it. But it doesn't much matter what you call it. But the thing is that'll be something for the coming council term to actually get into the real meat and bones of that.
Okay.
But that was certainly a dominant theme, and quite honestly, a lot of people use the prospect of there being this master plan as a way of kicking every possible can down the road. Anytime anybody proposed doing something, they said, we can't do a thing now, you have to wait for the master plan. So that became kind of a recurring theme throughout the entire city council term. The one huge exception to that was actually the Mass and Main project here. There had been some thoughts that this would be the grand year or 2 years for the C2 recommendations for something interesting or good to happen around Central Square, but nobody acted on anything. And then eventually Normandy Twining had bought a lot of property around Central Square, so they just put in their own zoning petition rather than wait for the C2 process to happen.
Right.
They just proposed a significant upzoning around Lafayette Square area directly across the street from us.
Yeah.
And eventually, when it was first proposed, I thought, well, this isn't going to happen. But then it happened, and in fact, it passed rather easily on a 7-2 vote. That it was extremely controversial. And I think anyone who's followed city council affairs over the last couple of years would have to acknowledge that the Mass and Main thing was a very dominant item in the middle, right? You know, and carried even into the election. People sort of vindictively and otherwise pointing fingers about that.
So where is it right now? It has passed.
It's all passed. There was a little disposition of a little alleyway to help make it happen.
Who were the two no votes?
I think it was Mazin and Car Loan, which is really kind of that's sort of one characteristic of the whole council term was oftentimes there were 7 councilors on one side and Mazin and Car Loan on the other. Interestingly, or maybe expectedly, by the time the election rolled around, those 2 became part of a slate of candidates, and the other 7 were on another. But this helped to define the sides, arguably. Hopefully, we won't be so sided in the council term.
Who kind of is.
Yeah, but you know, I don't think people should prejudge her. I think she could go lots of different ways in this. So, but anyway, that was the master plan, and things related to that were a big piece of what defined things.
Right.
Let's see. So as we kind of roll into later in 2014, I think affordable housing never is far from the conversation. There were proposals to actually build on parking lots in Central Square. Hasn't happened. There was a proposal to have a citywide affordable housing overlay. I'm still not quite 100% sure what that means, but I think it means that if you agreed to build affordable housing, you would be allowed certain a little more freedom in development projects. So anyway, those are things that were sort of part of the conversation for a lot. At some point, there was filtering into the mix was one or more discussions about living wage ordinances or minimum wage ordinances. There are some who wanted to have a citywide $15 minimum wage requirement for all businesses in Cambridge. The law department consistently came back and said the city council does not have such authority. And I think that's pretty much, as far as I can tell, that's pretty much settled. You know, it's funny, when we think back about it, one actual dominant thing that was happening in and around Cambridge and all over the place was it summer last? Was in 2014 was the market basket controversy. It's funny because now it's all like ancient history, but that was a huge thing actually during this 2-year period.
Even though there isn't any in Cambridge, but Somerville.
Well, it's close enough. That's where I do a lot of my shopping. And something happened in the summer of 2014 was something called the Car Loan Petition, which really I think added to the divisive nature at the city council level. Basically, and I kind of feel it was in some ways spurred by the Sullivan Courthouse matter, because there's always been this issue of if somebody files to build a development project under a special permit, as long as they meet the criteria of the special permit, then the planning board would have to give them their permit. But some people didn't like that. We wanted to change that. So the Car Loan Petition comes in that was going to take away some, not all, of the special permit authority from the planning board and give it to the city council.
Right. They thought basically that they were giving away the store, to put it very simply.
Well, you know what was effectively going to happen if that happened is every single thing would become a political football.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and
crazy.
It really would have been terrible.
Yeah.
So that is it was a substantial proposal. It never even got past the second reading because it got squashed 7-2, which I thought was the most merciful thing to have happened. But it was definitely a significant piece of what was going on. Last fall, we commenced the first round of participatory budgeting, which we spoke about in the first half hour. And now we've actually completed the second round of that. So this term certainly has been characterized by this $500,000 and now $600,000 discretionary money. So one thing that there was a lot of discussion, a lot of committee work was about STEAM or STEM. Let's see, that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Right. And there was a combination of the Economic Development Committee and the Neighborhood and Long-Term Planning Committee met some more to talk about STEAM. I think ultimately we'll see where this goes, but you know, personally, I don't see a lot of product as a result.
What was the intent? To try to get businesses more involved in youth or education?
No, not necessarily, but I think there's sort of an acknowledgement that there's a lot of people who are born and raised here need to kind of somehow
hone up
get in
those skills so they can get into those fields.
Yeah, so it's capitalize on the economy that's all
Right.
around us in Kendall Square and
Right.
elsewhere. But how do you bridge that gap? How do you take a kid who's growing up in Cambridge and
Yeah.
somehow hook him into that?
You do incubators or whatever.
Yeah,
that
I mean, I
term
think
is,
there were a lot
yeah.
of ideas
Yeah.
floated and a lot of reports, a lot of words put on paper, and
But nothing tangible.
the
because-
only thing I can
yeah.
honestly see that came out of that, so this to me is not a success story,
Yeah.
though maybe one day it will become one,
Okay.
was they wanted to create a new position to coordinate some STEAM-related things. Now, if the entire product of all of these dozens and dozens of meetings is you hired some new person,
Yeah.
I don't really see that as,
Right.
as substantial. But we wait and see.
Okay.
We wait and see on that one. So we can't go put that in the success column just
Right.
yet.
Yeah.
But perhaps one of these days.
All right.
There were some people had raised issues about process with the planning board. This community development department had various focus groups meeting to change some of the rules of the planning board. So much of that has happened or is happening.
Oh,
So
big
I think
focus groups like.
yeah. And I went to some, and I thought that was sort of a good thing. Just take a look at the rules, how you operate, and fix them.
And that was advertised.
I don't know how well it was advertised. I think with focus groups, you basically just sort of bring in some interested parties and get some good ideas going, and then.
But you have to know about.
Well,
it
then
to
once you
become
come
one.
up with the ideas, then you go through a more of a
Sure.
formal process
Okay.
in order to adopt rule changes.
I guess you have to be involved in these things.
Yeah, to some degree.
to
Most
know
people
about it.
weren't
Yeah.
really going to care. Like,
Yeah.
honestly, I went to some meetings, but I wasn't particularly bothered by the way the planning board operated in the first place.
Right, but you
I thought
needed
they
to
were
know
fine.
what was going on.
One thing that I think characterized this city council term a lot, this was the first full term. I mean, Bob Healy was city manager until June of 2013. Richie Rossi took over in July of 2013.
So this was his
So
first
6
under
months in,
this
and
new-
then he's
right.
been the city manager for this full term. So,
Right.
so one has to look at this council term not just in terms of the elected officials, but also the city
Right,
manager
it's a
and the
new
city administration.
manager, right.
And there are some things that I have to say. Richie Rossi has been an incredibly good to work with person. I think most city councils, even those who may ultimately not vote for him, have to at least acknowledge
Right.
that. One of the things that I found incredibly impressive is how they've been rejuvenating all of the city boards and commissions somewhat methodically. Going through taking great care in the appointments and reappointments of members. I think the deputy city manager, Lisa Peterson, has been
Right.
playing a very significant role in this. So to whatever degree the city is fueled by volunteerism and the input of citizens who serve on city boards and commissions, I think there's been a lot of good attention paid to that.
Good.
And again, we put that in the success column.
Right.
And it continues, and I think it's moving on.
Is that like rolling admissions to these boards, or is it only
Yeah, I
at
think-
certain times a year?
There was one of the problems that I think that happened over the years. Massachusetts law allows for a member of a board or commission to have their term expire, and then they just continue to serve until a reappointment is made.
Okay.
Or a replacement comes. So,
Okay.
so there may be technical expirations, but nothing really expires.
Right, but if somebody leaves, then there's an opening.
Right. So, but the thing is that it was sort of left to sort of die on the vine for a long time,
Okay.
and I think one of the things that characterizes Richie Rossi's managerial style is that he's been actively trying to update the roles and make sure that the expiration dates of terms are made clear.
Well, I know the Cambridge Recycling Advisory Committee that Randy took that very seriously and has for the last, I think,
Yeah.
6 years. So I think it's up to some people need a push maybe
I think
some committees, but she's actually been very forward. But I had to resubmit. Remember
I
you
did
had,
too as well.
And then
Yeah.
I decided this was it. I'm
Yeah,
not
that was
doing
it. Yeah. But the thing is,
Yeah.
it was something that there wasn't a whole lot of attention paid
You're
to for a
right.
long
She was
time.
one of the only few to do it, and also
Yeah.
taking minutes,
So now-
publishing
that's
minutes.
right. So I
for
think the
meetings.
city's been moving steadily in the best possible
meeting.
direction.
Talk
I
about
think
it.
actually another great thing is that
Yeah.
the city and the mayor's office have done multiple events to celebrate and thank members of
Yes.
city boards and commissions.
Yes.
So the emphasis
They
being
do that every
shifted
couple
toward that
years,
is,
yeah.
I think it's nothing but good.
Yeah.
plenty of other things. I think I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't mention one of the most significant things of this council term was actually the death of Brian Murphy,
Oh, wow, that's
which came as such a total shock
And
to
he was
everybody.
the deputy.
He was the deputy,
under community
assistant
development?
city manager in charge of community development department.
Right,
And that
Right.
totally
Yeah.
upended so much. Eventually, by the late into I think September of 2014, Iram Farouk became the new official head of the community development department. So we're moving in a pretty good direction there. But the thing is it would be
Well, but
I thought that was 15 that he
passed away in February of 2015.
right,
So,
okay.
but that was such a disruption, and
Yeah.
I don't think any review of the last 2 years would be complete without at least mentioning how.
Right.
And that happened in the middle of the worst horrible period of
I know.
snowstorms. It was a
in
period
New
of
York. He was in New York. on
yes,
that.
and it was a sense of such oppression for anyone who
Right.
was in any way affiliated with
So
or
young.
paying attention
Yeah.
to the city.
Yeah.
So let's see. As we headed in toward the end of the year and made the turn of the year, I think I mentioned a few things here. I did mention with the Foundry building how everybody talked about it in early 2014, but as we turned the year into 2015, one after another, there were votes taken to put the Cambridge Redevelopment Authority in charge and to really kind of make things happen. So again, in terms of the ledger of good points for the city council,
Yeah.
the fact that they got that done is a great thing. Let's see. There were a few things that I thought were kind of significant
Oh,
in the
nice.
yeah.
All right, never
There was there were proposals, arguably controversial proposals, most of which didn't really go anywhere. There were proposals for giving voting rights to non-citizens in all local elections without much restriction. I don't think that's going anywhere personally, but that's something that's been proposed. As we mentioned earlier, there was a proposal to have the city impose a $15 minimum wage requirement, but they didn't have the authority to do that. So this sort of goes in the category of things people wanted to have happen, but
Didn't
which were
happen.
simply not
Yeah.
going to happen. I think one of the biggest changes or biggest hopes was what happened with the General Services Administration and the Volpe site,
right.
the Department of Transportation, where after dreaming and hoping and wishing and praying, it sounds like a song,
Yeah.
for that maybe one day we would see housing and open space, publicly accessible open space, on that site in Kendall Square, the federal government actually budged and said, sure, let's talk. But that remains unresolved, so that's going to go kind of in the middle ground of maybe something will come of it, maybe nothing will come of it. So the council can't really kind of hang its
Does
hat
that
on that.
expire at some point? Does the federal
The-
government say either come up with something or we're
Well,
gonna just?
not really, but there's
They
certain.
don't want it.
The worry here has
Yeah.
been that you really wanted to take action now during the Obama administration if there was
Oh,
a
sure.
change, if there was a significant change
Right.
in a presidential administration that might trickle down into changes
Right.
in terms of
Use and all that.
so there was definitely a feeling of we should try and act somewhat quickly,
Soon.
but
Yes.
I don't think it's really going to happen, at least not anytime altogether soon. So let's see, what are some of the other ones that have been happening here? One thing that people did talk about was a change to not the incentive zoning, which is the linkage fees, which went from $4 and something to $12 per
yeah.
square foot of new development. But there was also some proposals to increase the inclusionary zoning requirements, which is right now 15%, but by the time you get your 15% bonus, and then they give you an extra unit for every unit of affordable housing you provide, it actually ends up being a little under 12% of actual new projects, which would consist of affordable housing units. Now, some people have suggested, well, maybe it shouldn't be 15%, maybe it should be 18% or 20%. Some people say, no, it should be 25, 30%.
Wow.
But most of those numbers are just fantasy. You pretty much get to the point where people say, well, we're not going to develop, we can't develop anything if you
Yeah.
make those requirements so significant. So let's see, so I guess changes in inclusionary zoning has to go in the category of not happened yet.
Okay.
along with things like affordable housing overlay districts or building middle-income housing on parking lots in and around Central Square, which are things people talked about going back 2 years or more, and that just doesn't seem to have happened. I did mention things about the appointments to boards and commissions. There were some days like this past June where the manager made so many appointments it was just overwhelming to, completely rejuvenating many of the boards and commissions throughout the city. It was really quite impressive. I did mention that we've set up the Foundry Advisory Committee, so that's kind of happening right now. Oh yeah, that was one thing. I don't know that this is something the city can actually accomplish anything, but going back a year or so, there was all this controversy about Uber and Lyft and these various other kind of
do it your own.
Yeah, roll your own kind of pseudo taxis, and a lot of pushback from the taxi industry. Ultimately, I think there were some were sort of trying to play to the taxi industry, but my sense is that actually there wasn't a whole lot of political will to do what they traditionally have done. In fact, there's been just as much willingness to sort of want to encourage these new disruptive technologies and whatever they call them. So where that stands is unclear. The city council passed a number of orders that were related to Uber, Lyft, and taxi cabs. I think the jury's still out exactly how that's going to work.
Well, it's a statewide issue too.
It's
Baker's dealing with it.
It's actually not just statewide.
It's federal. That's true.
It's even international. This is a
good point.
These are big
so
changes.
Is Airbnb.
Yeah, and the thing is that these sort of part of what they call it the sharing economy.
Sharing economy. Yeah.
This is something I think will sort of.
How do you tax it? That's really what the issue is.
Or how do you
state and federal?
And how do you regulate it?
True.
Or should you regulate it?
Well, should you? I mean, if someone decides to do it, it's up to them. But the whole thing about taxation, because the hotels pay taxes to the city.
Yeah.
So it's a big issue.
Absolutely, and there were controversies with Uber drivers doing bad things.
Right.
And
I took my first Uber ride with some people in D.C.
I wouldn't even know how.
I know. I had to get it downloaded. You have to have something on your phone.
You have to have an iPhone. I don't have a cell phone.
Well, there you go.
So there you go.
I wouldn't
so
admit
not for
that
me.
too much.
Don't worry, I'm a total Luddite.
But he does have
okay.
an iPad, so he does check.
It's true. Yeah. It's true. Absolutely
He gets Facebook messages, so Facebook them.
Yeah, I did mention earlier two of the most annoying aspects of this council term. One was the complete abuse of the open meeting law provisions, basically just to harass without any real purpose. Can you explain very simply what people were objecting to? I think the first one that was sort of significant was when they were doing MIT zoning back in late 2013. There was, somebody from MIT made a little gesture to the mayor and said, hey,
can I talk to you?
We got to talk to you because we can't live with that provision. So they went over and they talked to him, and then I think it was a vote change or whatever, and then people claimed, it's a violation.
But when you go into executive committee, isn't that allowed? That wasn't
that's separate. This was not executive.
I
this
see.
Is open.
Okay, so they're talking about when someone has a side conversation or a side email or something.
Yeah. But there were one after another. I can't even remember all the particulars but it was became kind of open season. Let's grab some provision of the open meeting law just to be a pain, not necessarily to do anything useful or constructive. One of the candidates, I think, for city council. Well, ultimately, one of the Elon Levy was one of the city council candidates. Actually claimed that the forming of a slate of candidates was a violation of the open meeting law. That's when we reached the level of complete absurdity.
That's absurd. They're not even elected officials.
Right.
Well, actually, that's not true. Some of them were.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the laws are laws, and we should obey the laws. But the thing is that there's also people capitalizing on laws just to be pains. And I feel that many of
to get together and call it an open. Come on.
There was no violation at all. Nobody's going to ever feel that it really was. There was also two people who were other council candidates, Courtney and Dietrich, who didn't get a license for something or withdrew a license application. They pretty much went on the warpath, just trying to
something about minutes and being included.
But they've been basically bullying every possible city department they can have here, and this is nobody's trying to justify doing things secretly. But the thing is that if you basically bring in recording equipment and stick it in everybody's face just to harass them.
Well, one of them's a lawyer, so.
But when you do that just for the sake of intimidation. That to me is not the spirit of an open meeting law or any other reasonable law. So anyway, as we sort of wind down toward the fall of 2015, oh yeah, one of the things I thought was sort of, it was sort of meaningless in a way, but also kind of great in a way too, was Dennis Benzan, Denise Simmons, others were wanting to do official changing of the name of Area 4 to The Port.
Oh, okay.
Now this is largely a populist thing. I think a lot of people who live there just wanted to see it happen.
It always confused me. I thought I lived in the port because it's Cambridge Port, but it's
Well,
apparently not.
It's confusing because
There's the coast. We're the coast.
Right, in the middle of the coast. But then there's Riverside, Cambridge Port,
Yeah.
and now the port. So what is it?
Well,
the coast?
the
port?
coast is Cambridge Port.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Riverside's
Well, so I've heard
Riverside, I
people
think.
talk
I don't
about
know.
the lower port and the upper port.
I don't know.
But they also did another thing. It was around the same time, which was the renaming of the Area 4 Youth
Yeah.
Center.
Okay.
Instead of changing it to the Port Youth Center, it became the
Oh,
Janet and Robert
I
Moses Youth Center, which I thought was a great thing.
They were educators? or they
Robert
were-
Moses is really at the heart of the algebra project.
Oh, of course, yes.
And they actually operated out of that building for a time too.
That is
So I thought
nice.
that was a really
Yes.
great thing. So as we headed into the fall, of course, election day came.
Right.
There was some change in the council, a couple changes on the school committee as well. More zoning petitions as we sort of, one of the things I kind of don't like the fact is that when the city council business is so thoroughly dominated by zoning petitions, but again, any retrospective has to kind of at least acknowledge that that was
Yeah,
very
it's-
much
it's
the
what
case.
Yeah.
It actually framed a lot of the election, I think.
Yeah.
Housing and affordability and development and, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. So, anyway, just in summary, since we're pretty
Yeah.
much out of time here, just
Yeah.
sort of say that for those who say that this is a do-nothing council, I think you're wrong. I think there were a lot of very substantial things that were taken up. Not everything was finalized. Some things were sort of destructive and bitter. But, honestly, having watched this over the decades, this was not particularly better nor particularly worse. It was just different. That's it. So, anyway, next week we'll start to talk a little bit more about looking ahead.
Right.
All right, so until then, this has been Cambridge Inside.
Out.